everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to discuss the books that I have read recently. So instead of doing a full-on, May wrap-up, this is kind of like a wrap-up of the 2.5 weeks I was in Texas. Basically, I've been on vacation 4 months. The first week I was in New York and I was jet-lagged and I didn't read anything. And the last week of May, I'll be coming back to Japan and I'll have to be going to work and I'll be jet-lagged and I won't be reading. So basically, these are the books that I read in the 2.5 weeks that I was here in Texas and whatnot. And because everything is bigger in Texas, I read only novellas. So I have 6 novellas to talk to you about today. Because basically, I just wanted a way to get through my TBR, like the books, some of the books I left behind. I just kind of wanted a quick way to get through them and make sure they didn't stay behind, basically. And also make sure that I didn't have to take them with me, you know? Like if it's a book I can get done like a day or 2 days, then why not, right? Let's start with the first book that I read this month. And it's actually a book I found in a used bookstore in New York. It's a book I've been wanting to read. That's Kim Jiyoung, born 1982, by Nam-Joo, translated by Jamie Chang. This, I would have to say, is probably my favorite book of the month, or whatever, you know, you understand me. It's because it's very interesting. Basically what it is it talks about our character Kim Jiyoung, and so she's born in 1982. We are establishing like the time frame in which we are discussing this particular character. So for me, being born around the same time, it really, like, I could really understand the references she was making, which made it very interesting, and probably much more interesting for me. And so in any case, you're following basically this woman's life of how she started off as a young child, a little girl, and then she becomes, you know, a teenage woman, and then she becomes an adult woman. And it's basically the rules that women have to take as they grow up. So first they start off as a nice little child, but then they become like, they're pushed into becoming good young daughters, and then they're pushed into becoming good young supporters of the men in the family, and then they're raised to become good young wives, and once they become a wife, they're trained to become supportive daughters-in-law, and then after that they have to become daughters of their parents when their parents become elderly. So basically it's this whole statement about how women are primarily being raised to take care of other people and just sort of ignore themselves to take care of other people. I didn't even mention the role of becoming a mother, where you have a child yourself. And this book not only delves into our main character's life, having to go through these steps and these moments in life, but it does also reflect on her own mother, what her mother's generation had to go through, even what her mother-in-law's generation had to go through. And she basically finds herself thinking about, well, what generation can we create? What generation are we creating? Are we just repeating the same thing over and over again? And so it's very fascinating because, you know, it's very on point. It's very much, you know, South Korean society at this moment. But being me living in Japan, it's also very much still a very Japanese issue. But still, this still isn't limited to East Asia. I mean, you find this in so many cultures around the world. You find this, you know, I mean, women have to do this all the time, where basically many times they are raised or nurtured into thinking that they have to give themselves up for men in their family, whether it's their brothers or their fathers or the husbands, basically, or their own children, their own sons. So it's this very poignant story, but in the same thing, sorry, I don't know what's going on with my voice today. And at the same time, it's not really a story at all. This really reads like nonfiction, particularly because as she writes this book, she has footnotes at the bottom where she writes like a certain fact, and then on the footnote has the source. So for example, Here she writes, many of Jiyoung's college friends told similar stories of their father's businesses folding or of them being laid off during the recent financial crisis. While the economy remained bad and college students got by with part-time work and help from parents whose job security still hung in the balance, college tuition fees climbed as if to make up for lost time. In the 2000s, the cost of college tuition increased by over twice the consumer inflation rate. So you can kind of see how there's this really big mix of like non-fiction vibes within very much this fictional story. But like I said, it's not really a story. At the very beginning, we're very briefly introduced to the character as a wife who is sort of losing control of herself, and then the end wraps that up. But the whole entire middle just reads like nonfiction. It just reads like, you know, I was raised this way, and then these were the circumstances in South Korea. Then I became this such age, and these were still the circumstances in South Korea. But the thing is that it's incredibly fascinating, and it's very, very well done. It's a very quick read as well, and it'll definitely make you want to highlight quite a few passages. Whether that's as new information to you or something that you really like shared similar thoughts or similar ideas, or if you're if you're a man and you're married to a woman, or you have your own daughters and you're trying to think of like, well, how do I want to support this person, that this book can obviously give great ideas such as this. So yeah, I really like this. It's not like amazing like new forever represent South Korean fiction. I don't think so, because like I said, it doesn't really carry that much of a fiction, it doesn't really carry that much of a fiction feel to it. But in terms of just the like true the ability to really put into words women in South Korea, like putting that into words, I think this is very well done. So yeah, this was my favorite of my reading time these past 2.5 weeks. So now let's move on. The next book I read is called Train Dreams by Denis Johnson. All these books are around like 120 pages or so, basically. This one was a book that I bought a while ago. I actually ordered it thinking I was coming back to Texas. That trip got canceled, so this has been on my TBR for like 2 years, and I haven't had access to it. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna read it while I'm here. And unfortunately, that 2 years wait was not as wasn't really worth it. I really wanted more from this. What is it? It's still good, and I think a lot of people will love this. I really do think a lot of people will love this, but for me, it didn't give me the punch that I wanted. But basically, what is it? It's the story of Robert Grenier. He's a day laborer in the American West at the start of the 20th century, and it just goes through his life as he deals with hardships, losing his family, and basically just having to go through America at that time. I think it's beautifully written. I think it's very well written, and I think the characters were good. I just couldn't get into it. So I very much like books about the American West, and I very much like looking at this time period, and I think it was good, but I don't know, there was something lacking, and there was something like a little bit. It might be the fact that like right now I'm feeling more action oriented, and a lot of the books I'm picking up are very reflective. So it might be that this might have been a little bit too reflective for me. I think I might have wanted a little bit more movement in the story, and a little bit more of an emotional connection, if anything. While I felt the hardship of our main character, there was still a disconnect. And for me, that made this story just a story and not something that I could really consider incredibly memorable. So still very good, just not in the direction I wanted to go, basically. So that's Train Dreams by Denis Johnson. The next book I read was Le Fait du Prince by Amelie Nothomb. I really wanted, I have 3 Nothombs unread on my shelf, so I wanted to get through one of these, and it's always good to pick up a Nothomb. She always knows how to create a story, even though sometimes I feel like I wish she would take more time to more properly develop a story. But Le Fait du Prince basically is about this man who one day a stranger rings at his doorbell, asks if he can come in to make a phone call, and as the stranger makes a phone call, he falls over dead. And our man decides, instead of calling the police, he's going to take the life of this man who just died. And so he assumes the identity of this man, and it takes him to a very nice apartment in Versailles where he meets the wife of this man, and he just sort of just creates this new life for himself. Very, very, very absurd, very, very Nothomb-esque. In terms of like wanting to read this, so like I always tend to rate, like I don't tend to rate Nothomb against other books. I tend to rate her books against her own books, basically. And I would say this is one I preferred more than some other books that I've read by her. It's, you know, it's Nothomb. What can you say? It's absurd. It's always ridiculous. There's always like these conversations that are like a little bit ridiculous. They're not as pseudo-intellectual as some of her words. Amelie Nothomb, sometimes I feel like the way she writes her books, she like finds like 5 super obscure books in the French dictionary that no one uses or maybe not even know. And then she's like, you know what? I'm going to create a book based off of those 5 vocabulary words. Sometimes her books feel like that. This wasn't the case, fortunately. This one was much more readable and much less like pseudo-intellectual and whatnot. But it's an absurd story, like just like she does. And but it was one of the more fun absurd stories that she does. So if you want to read about the absurdity of a man pretending to be another man, read it. I mean, like Nothomb, if you haven't read her already, you probably won't. If you have, then you probably will read this anyway. So like that's kind of where she is for me. Next book I read, and I did a whole video on, I make it sound like it was an astonishing video. That is Le Petit Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupery, The Little Prince, which I revealed in that video that I have never actually read it, this book. I never even knew what the book was about, but I did do a whole video about that, so I won't talk about this too much, except for the fact that it is indeed a very lovely story. Like, I wanted to read the book because it's so famous, it's so well known, it's been translated into so many languages. Like, what is it about this book that everyone loves? It's like, okay, yeah, I agree. It's nice. Like, this is good. This is something I would definitely, if I ever had a child, or anything, whatever, friends, nephews, nieces, I would definitely read this, for sure. Like, this, definitely a book that will continue to be well-loved and well-liked throughout the ages. Like, it's really interesting, though. It's really funny how this really, like, strange children's book from France has, you know, really enamored people worldwide. I mean, that's absolutely fascinating. But, yeah, I mean, it's well-deserved. It's I really appreciate this. I thought this was really good. 2 books. Let's do this one, The Lost Daughter by Elena Ferrante. This is not a book that I chose myself. This is a book that my mom put on my table in my room for me to read it, only to reveal later that she didn't actually like it. Sometimes I feel like my mom gives me books that she doesn't like to sort of like see whether she's like, whether I'll agree with her not liking it. Like, she wants to see, like, is my opinion like off the mark, or will like other people agree with me? So she does this to me quite a bit, and we actually have very similar reading tastes, so oftentimes, you know, I will agree. And I kind of agree with this one. It's not that I didn't like it, but it just didn't do much for me. It didn't excite me, it didn't thrill me. Basically, what is this book about? It's about this woman who basically goes on vacation in Italy and kind of reflects on herself as a mother, because while she's on the beach, she's been observing this woman with her very small child, and she's also observing the family that revolves around this woman, and she just becomes really quite fascinated. And then one day the daughter loses her doll, or loses it. Turns out our protagonist kind of doesn't really steal it, but like notices that the doll is just sitting in the sand, and instead of returning the doll immediately, she kind of takes it for herself and keeps it to herself for quite a while. But during this entire time, while she's, you know, the little girl who's lost her doll has been sad this entire time, and it's really causing a lot of grief to this mother of the small child. And yet our protagonist continues to keep the doll, knowing that the child is going through a hard time, but she's still trying to become friends with this young mother. So it's kind of weird, and it's this whole thing about like, in like the imperfect mother, the mother who like it's all about mother-daughter relationships, about how your relationship with your mother might affect your relationship with your own children. Your family relations can affect that and whatnot. And so your ability to be a good mother, is that, is that something you learn versus nurture? Is that something nature? Is that something inherent to women to be able to be good mothers? And so this book really reflects that, because basically our protagonist was not a good mother, and was one of those people who decided to be a little bit more selfish with their life, to really follow their career and not fall into this, I have to be a mother, so I have to do everything for my children. I have to forget everything I ever cared about. So, there's a lot to be said about this book, and when it comes to that relationships, it's really well done. So I do recommend this book. It's just for me personally, it didn't do much for me. I definitely only finished reading it because it's a short book. It's only 140 pages. So it was easy to finish. It was easy to tear through it, but I just did not connect it to it very much. And I mentioned very much that in other videos that it's not necessarily that I need to have an emotional connection to books. I don't need to identify with the protagonist. I don't need to feel that at all. But like I said again, this could all be a state of mind of me wanting slightly less reflective books, and maybe wanting something maybe a little light. Actually, maybe these days I feel like I want something more lighthearted, something more like with a faster pace, or I don't know. There's something missing definitely in my reading these days. But yeah, so this wasn't able to really satisfy me in the current state that I'm in. But that shouldn't take away from the book itself. And I think a lot of people will definitely enjoy this. My mom did say she liked the movie better, if that says anything. I don't know. But yeah, that's The Lost Daughter by Elena Ferrante. And then I finished, because I will not be able to read anything by tomorrow. I leave after tomorrow in the morning. I'm not going to finish a book in one day. So the last book I read during this time is Le Colonel Chabert by Honore de Balzac. I've already read a Balzac this month. I read one in January. I read Le Père Goriot, the Old Goriot, and really enjoyed it. And this one, again, it's only 100 pages. So I was like, all right, I'll read another Balzac this year, and it'll be quite fun. And this one is one of the ones I preferred, on top of, so like Le Petit Prince, and then the Kim Jiyoung, the South Korean book. Those two plus this one would be my favorites of this little reading period. This one is about a man, the Colonel Chabert, who basically comes back from the dead. What does that mean? Is that he was fighting on the front line, and then he got in a terrible accident. He was not considered. He was, what's the word? He was, the doctors proclaimed he was dead. They checked him off as dead, and then his body was thrown into a ditch. But it turns out he was still alive, and he wakes up in the middle of this ditch, and he manages to get out alive, and it takes a really long time for him to recover, because he had a very serious injury, obviously so serious that he was considered dead. But he comes back, but in the meantime, he's been proclaimed dead. He's been by the government. He's been considered dead by the government, and his wife remarries and has children, and she took the entire fortune of this man. So our character Chabert has to prove that he is Chabert. So he goes to a notary, he goes to a lawyer, so that the lawyer can help him, reclaim his life, basically. And I thought it was a really fun story because of that. Just because it's a book that really reflects on like the lack of justice in France at this time, and even now. This could very easily happen in our current society. But in terms of the society in which this was written in, it was very much about like the lack of justice, the lack of support for people who have to go through such extreme yet odd ordeals. And basically what it is to sort of reclaim your name and reclaim yourself, to have been forgotten, and to have been forgotten mostly because people want to forget you. So it goes through all these little parts of society with this, and made it for a really fun read. Like, I really enjoyed this one. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a Balzac fan now. I think I definitely feel like Honore de Balzac, I could definitely read more of his books. Yeah, so this was the last book I read in these 2.5 weeks. Very fun to have read so much variety. Although not everything was a hit, I could still see at least what was good about the book. So that's very important for me. You're not always going to be able to connect with every book. You're not always going to like every book. But for me, at least if it's a book I don't get along with that well personally, at least I want to be able to feel and be able to see objectively that, okay, this is a good book. It just happens to not be for me. And it just happens that it might also just not be for me at this current time in my reading life. So I think all these books definitely have an audience, definitely have people who absolutely love these books. So yeah, very happy with what I read this time, and I'm interested to see what will happen in June. I had some ideas of what I wanted to read in June before I left for Texas. Am I going to continue in that same vein, or am I going to go in a different direction? We'll have to see. In any case, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!